Doctor watched as the Emperor of the Rachnos screamed. He'd given her a chance, even offered to take her to another planet where she and her children could live in peace, and she refused, as they always did. As the basement around them buckled under the cascade of the River Thames crashing in from above, the cascade that he had caused, the Doctor felt safe in the knowledge that his judgment was right and just. The Empress had planned to feed her children on the people of Earth, and if drowning them was the best way to stop her, then so be it. "My children! My children!" she screeched in blind anguish. The Rachnos had known loss. Doctor gave her that. In the dark times, the fledgling empires had essentially purged them from the universe. But for good reason. They were destructive by nature. The children, born with a hunger that could only be sated by feeding on the life of an entire planet. Had he not stepped in, they would have proceeded to devour every living thing on Earth before moving on to the next for lunch. The Empress denied his offer of help, and as such, she became the architect of her own demise. Yes, he thought. This is right. A certain sound, however, disagreed. It bored deep into the Doctor's very soul. Beneath the crash of the water, the Empress's dumb cries amplified through the tunnel that extended deep into the center of the Earth. The garbled screams of the Rachnos children as their lungs filled with water. He couldn't escape the thought of them, dead before their first glimpse of sunlight. But he also couldn't stop, for this was right. "Teleport me!" the Empress screamed, and with that, she vanished. The Doctor knew, however, that she had expended every last drop of her Huon energy. She could very well return to her Webstar, but she'd be defenseless and at the mercy of the human race. He just stood there, watching, until finally, every last scream died out. It was only then that he realized that the water was now at his feet, which meant Penny. How could he have forgotten her? The Chiswick temp, around whom the Empress's plan had hinged. The Doctor liked her, but this wasn't her place. It was Christmas Eve, after all, and he was sure that the last thing she wanted to do would be drowning. Oh no. Still just about conscious. He'd inadvertently knocked her out when he had cut her down from the Empress's web earlier. He thought she could make the swing, but sadly not. From here, he could see that her leg was trapped in the railings, as the whole staircase grew more and more submerged. Immediately, he began lashing through the torrent to get to her, the water now up to his waist, and climbing.
"I've got you."
He pulled her tight towards him, and with a great deal of effort hoisted her up towards the stairs. "Are they dead? Did you manage to kill them?" She just about managed to ask.
"Yes."
It was the right thing to do. "Good," she said. "Good." The word hit him. With the whole of the River Thames emptying itself into the chamber, one flicker of hesitation could lead to an almost certain death, but the Doctor was caught off guard. Good. Would Rose have said good? No use thinking about that now, the Doctor thought. By his calculation, he had 57 seconds before the entire base was flooded. That was 57 seconds to climb out of the chamber and either find the TARDIS or otherwise some sort of escape hatch. The TARDIS would take way too long, he decided. Escape hatch it was. 56 seconds.
"Not enough,"
said a small voice in the back of his head.
"Shut up."
He thought back, almost out loud. But thinking about thinking was wasting time. 55 seconds. So they ran. And ran. 41 seconds. 40. 39. The entire structure heaving around them as the water bared down on it, bursting into every room and cavity. 36. 35. 34.
"Again, not enough."
The voice told him, and this time he couldn't deny it. What would Rose have done if she were here? Would she have stopped him before it got to this point? Water was now spilling in from every angle. In 30 seconds, the entire base would be submerged. The Doctor could hold his breath for far longer than Penny's human lungs probably allowed her to, but all it'd take was one unforeseen current to whip them away, and they'd both be finished. "There!" Penny shouted. They'd almost run past it, a steel ladder which undoubtedly led to the surface.
"Go on! Up, up, up!"
shouted the Doctor. He let her go first, and with great effort she managed to yank herself up out of the water onto the first dry rung of the ladder. He could feel the water gripping tight around his suit, restricting his movement. "I can't open it!" shouted Penny. She was struggling with the hatch above. The doctor raised his sonic screwdriver in response, pointing its blue light at the hatch. It whirred, but nothing happened.
It's deadlock sealed.
He called up to her. Of course it was. This was Torchwood after all. With 21 seconds left, he came to the grim realization of exactly what this meant. "So what are we going to do?" called Penny. He looked up at her. Poor Penny, the temp who had unwittingly become the fulcrum of an alien plot. It had transpired that her manager, H.C. Clements, was in cahoots with the Rachnos all along. For as long as she'd known him, he'd been secretly dosing her with Huon particles, which the Empress needed in order to awaken her children. Ironically, this is what brought the Doctor's attention to the whole ordeal in the first place. But that was a long story. Poor Penny just wanted to go home.
You should have stopped.
Whispered the voice, now firmly at the front of the Doctor's mind.
Were you enjoying it?
15 seconds. The water was up to his neck now. Sonic in between his teeth, he waded back to the other side of the corridor. There it was, a wall panel which, following a few clicks of the Sonic, fell to reveal the hatch controls. If he was good, and he was very good, he would be just about able to override the deadlock to allow them to escape. He just had to reverse the power dampers and... A distant ceiling collapsed. The Doctor looked up just in time to see the sheer wall of water thrashing towards him from down the corridor. The hatch above Penny's head clicked. It only took the slightest pressure from her palm to affirm to her that yes, it could be opened. With all her might, she flipped the thing over, revealing the night sky above her. A minute ago, she thought she'd never see it again, and now there it was, looking magnificent. She was so relieved, she almost didn't clock her immediate surroundings. Another step up the ladder, and she could have been in a quarry. One more, and of course, no, it was the Thames. Completely devoid of any water. That was a sight. She looked back down the hatch to see that the ladder was now completely submerged. With any luck, the Doctor would be right behind her. But he was nowhere to be seen beneath the murky water. She called for him. And again. She even stuck her head under the water for a better look, then immediately felt stupid for doing so. The Doctor hadn't made it out. Just as she was about to call his name again, an immense flash stopped her. For one moment, the sky lit up completely. The bang came a couple of seconds later, the ground shaking from the sheer force of the exploding Rachnos ship. Penny didn't know how or why this had happened, but she felt comfort in the fact that she was now safe again. This had been a strange couple of Christmases. If only she hadn't taken that role at H.C. Clements, she thought. But only for a moment as she remembered that the Doctor still hadn't appeared. That strange man who, in one day, had entered her life, made her realize it was in jeopardy, saved her, and now had just saved her again. And he'd gone just as quick as he'd arrived. He died for her. There was no water in the Thames apart from the tears of one Penny Carter for a man she barely knew. The Doctor opened his eyes, reflecting the turquoise glow of the time rotor. He was in the TARDIS. Well, not really. He was still drowning in a basement under the Thames flood barrier. The TARDIS scanner told him that he now had 4 seconds before he lost consciousness. Well, not really. It was his own calculation. But this was a crisis scenario, so the Doctor did what he always did seconds before facing certain doom. He pictured himself back in the TARDIS, having already made his brilliant escape. Any other time, he'd be trying to work out how he did it.
But you can't this time, can you?
He looked up from the scanner. Of course. The TARDIS had tried its best to distract him by tracking traces of Huon energy to London, Christmas Eve 2007. But that didn't change the fact that it had still been less than 24 hours since he'd lost her. Rose Tyler. She stood in front of him now, exactly as he last saw her. For he'd led her to be trapped in a parallel world. For good.
Oh, I don't know. 4 seconds. You can do a lot in 4 seconds if you think fast. I've got out of worse.
He replied to himself.
The current's already carried you 30 metres. All it takes is a pipe in the wrong place and BAM! Before you can even regenerate.
He glanced at the scanner. 3.2 seconds. And one by one, the lights around the TARDIS walls started to dim. The mighty thrum of the engines grinding slowly to a halt. Still, Rose just stood there. He couldn't bring himself to look at her, until he remembered that, of course, she was just his thoughts, imagined out loud. And since they were his thoughts, he was in complete control of everything he was seeing. So why was she still there?
I'm sorry,
he found himself saying. Don't say that, she replied. How are you doing? This was strange. Having a conversation with his own brain, which was emulating his missing friend based on his memory of her. It was like therapy. Maybe it was the oxygen starvation, or maybe seconds before the end, he was just scared of dying alone.
I went too far,
he said finally, the admission quivering in his voice.
Those Ragnos were children. They could have learned.
She spoke. Had you not done something, they would have gone on to eat 6 billion people.
Yeah.
It was all he could say. He couldn't help but wonder if he had been cruel. Could he justify saving the many at the expense of a few? It was a choice he had always tried to avoid. But maybe this was just the cross he had to bear. The curse of being the Doctor. Maybe it is, said Rose. He kept forgetting she was on his mind.
I never thought the last act of my life would be murder.
But it wasn't though, was it? She looked at him, almost imploringly, the look he knew so well. You saved her.
But I could have done so much more.
Oh, shut up, she interjected. The world is a better place because you were there and you know it. He glanced at the scanner again. 1.9 seconds. He could just about see it beneath the intermittent distortion of the screen as it too fizzled out. He could feel himself shutting down. Sensations vanishing from his imagined legs. As he fell, he tried to grasp at the console for support, but missed and crumpled to the floor. Rose was immediately next to him. He wasn't in the habit of imagining himself being held, but then again, it too was preferable to watching the Torchwood base flash by as certain death grew closer. Gosh, he thought, dying is out of character for me. I was wondering, said Rose, if I'm trapped in a parallel world, I wonder if there's a parallel Doctor.
Could be.
Replying to her took all of his energy.
Who knows if Gallifrey even exists there?
My point is, you could die here, but the story of the Doctor wouldn't be over. There could be another one. There could be many out there.
I never told you, did I?
She stared at him. What?
That the Doctor is a promise. That anyone could be the Doctor, on a good day.
She smiled. Yes. Quite right. He laughed at that, and his hand relaxed to his side. It was just about too much mental energy to imagine it brush against the metal grate of the TARDIS floor. Instead, he let it float. And he realised that he was still gripping the sonic. It was no use to him now. Slowly, the green ambience of the TARDIS began to give way to the murky underwater current as he pictured it in slow motion. 1 second.
So this is it then. The end. Finito. All gone. Everything has its time, and this was his. From a strange junkyard to a basement under the Thames. Oh well, it had to happen someday. Still, 700 years of time and space, give or take a few hundred eaten up and spat out by the Time War. It had been good. Shame I'd never really got around to exploring the dark times, or found out what the fate of Beau's secret was. But that's okay. There's always something I don't know, isn't there? And that's okay.
He felt his heart beat slower and slower.
Well, hopefully I've been able to leave the universe in a better shape than I'd found it. And who knows, maybe someone else could pick up the torch, and maybe, one day, they wouldn't have to pick between the many and the few.
Somehow, as the TARDIS melted away, he could feel no more sensation in his arms. He could still see Rose's face, her smile, and for a moment, For 1/2 of a beautiful second, he left his guilt behind.
How long you gonna stay with me?
She smiled. Forever.
The doctor smiled and
Closed his eyes.